Hello, my name's Luke Massey and I'm a wildlife photographer and cameraman. And today I'm going to be telling you a bit about my project, The Last Song of the Nightingale, a conservation documentary that I filmed in 2019 and actually released during lockdown this year. This was a documentary with a bit of a difference. We weren't commissioned by anyone, it was a complete passion project. And when I say we were a really small team made up of myself, my partner Katie Stacey, our sound man Nicholas Allen, our animator Will Rose, and a mixture of very helpful and kind people that donated us footage, an amazing array of contributors, and my camera assistant Austin Ferguson. The reason we didn't want to get commissioned for this is because we've kind of worked in the industry a little bit on various different productions for people like the BBC, National Geographic and Netflix, but we wanted to make a project that we had complete and full control of and that lots of people could feel like they were part of it and contribute to. Not just the contributors in the film, but we crowdfunded the whole project. We had a minuscule budget of £15,000 to create an hour-long documentary, which was a struggle in itself. The nightingale itself as a bird in the UK has declined 90% in the last 50 years, which is pretty crazy. It's on the verge of extinction in the UK, and it's not doing very well across the rest of Europe really either. And it's not just that it's declining and that it's becoming endangered. It's a species that is entwined in not just our natural history, but our cultural history as well. And that's the story we wanted to tell. We didn't want to just create a nature documentary. We wanted to create a documentary that appealed to a huge range of different people, from musicians and artists, to scientists and naturalists, to recipe testers, and just people that might think birds are boring. And maybe you're watching this and you think birds are boring, but that was the aim of this documentary. It was to prove that birds aren't boring, and we could use the nightingale as this umbrella species to represent a whole range of environmental issues whilst telling the story of this amazing bird. Now, I say recipe testers because that's the first excerpt of the film that I'm going to show you. There's some incredible stories, and we did so much research in the build-up to this documentary. Lots and lots of reading, lots and lots of Zoom calls, of reading scientific papers, speaking to ornithologists, scientists, historians, people who have written books on the nightingale. It's probably one of the most versified birds in literature. Lots of you might have heard of the stories of the Romantic poets that kind of spoke about the nightingale. The Ode to a Nightingale by John Keats, of course, being the very famous one, which we did cover in the documentary, but there's lesser known stories. We found a recipe called pasta for nightingales for bird keepers, I think in the 15th century, to be able to keep nightingales in cages, which I don't recommend, but to keep your nightingale singing its incredible song. There was an incredible recipe that included things like saffron that people could cook up and feed to their nightingale to keep it singing.
Since the classical period, nightingales were kept as caged birds. A 17th century nightingale pasta recipe, believed to keep your nightingale happy and encourage it to sing, proves what prized possessions these songbirds were. The recipe instructed for 2 to 3 pounds of chickpea flour, half a pound of almonds, 4 ounces of butter and 4 egg yolks to be kneaded together in a basin. In a new cooking pot, a pound of honey and 3 ounces of butter were to be well boiled. This was all mixed together and kneaded constantly with a flat spoon until such time as the pasta was all mixed in and had become granular and yellow in colour. For winter feedings, it recommended that a copper Baiocca coin's worth of saffron was added to the honey and butter, as saffron both heated and cheered the bird. The mixture was then rolled into spaghetti-like strands, dried and put into a jar, ready to feed your nightingale.
We opened the documentary with that kind of literal and cultural history with the John Keats and with this pasta for nightingales as a nice kind of close and a surprise. Some people, well, some people, probably not many people have seen a recipe in a kind of documentary about nature before. So we wanted to kind of make people sit up and see things that they hadn't seen before. But we also wanted to tell really important stories and stories of why the nightingale were declining. And unfortunately, these stories were pretty easy to find. There's a site called Lodge Hill in Kent, which is probably one of the nation's best locations for nightingales. And it's under threat from development. They want to build, I think, 5,000 homes over the site. So that was one story we wanted to tell. And then you go up into Suffolk to RSPB Minsmere, which is currently battling EDF Energy, basically, to stop them from building a third nuclear terminal there, which could spell disaster not only for the reserve, but for nightingales that call the reserve home, and all manner of species as well. So this is going back to using the nightingale as an umbrella species to tell these important stories.
But while progress is made in one location, another project proposal has arisen that could once again spell disaster for the nightingale.
RSPB Minsmere on the Suffolk coast is a rich tapestry of habitat covering over 1,000 hectares, 2,500 acres of reed bed, saline lagoons through to heathland, scrub and woodland. And that's home to more than 340 species of birds, including iconic species such as avocet, marsh harrier, bittern, bearded tit and nightingale. To the south of Minsmere is Sizewell B nuclear power station, and EDF Energy are proposing to build a new nuclear power station, Sizewell C, in that area that will be slap bang on the southern boundary of RSPB Minsmere. That's a potential threat to the important habitats and wildlife that Minsmere supports. In early 2019, over 20,000 people raised their voice in support of Minsmere through the Love Minsmere campaign. And that's been really important in demonstrating the value and importance of Minsmere, both to wildlife and people. EDF are now in the planning process, reviewing that information and pulling together their final planning proposal. The decision as to whether the Sizewell C nuclear power station will go ahead is expected in early 2021. And if it does go ahead, that will be a construction project lasting 9 to 12 years. The big impact of that construction project is potentially all the noise and the light and the disturbance, and that could have significant impact on the wildlife that calls Minsmere home, including species such as nightingale.
But we were also conscious of not always going on about doom and gloom. There are stories of hope, and in the UK there's some great stories of hope, such as the Knepp Rewilding estate, an arable farm that stopped ploughing the land, stopped planting crops and let nature take over, and they are now reaping the rewards. Wildlife is coming back in its droves, including the nightingale, and it's an incredible place that Izzy and Charlie have got there. And you can walk down the footpaths and hear turtle doves purring, cuckoos calling, and nightingales singing.
But there is space for farming to change. Fewer than 40 miles south of London, the 3,500-acre Knepp estate is spearheading the movement.
I think rewilding is basically letting go. What you're trying to do is get natural processes back into a landscape. So, unlike conventional conservation, you're not conserving with a specific target species in mind or a group of species. You are just trying to get dynamic natural processes back into the landscape and then really sitting back as much as possible and letting nature do its thing, letting nature reveal itself. What we've done here at Knepp is put in free-roaming animals, and they drive the system. They create habitats. So we have free-roaming Old English Longhorn cattle doing a very good impression of their ancestor, the aurochs. And we've got Exmoor ponies being tarpan. And we have Tamworth pigs being wild boar. And then we've got red deer and fallow deer, and we've got roe deer as well in small numbers. And so all those animals in a landscape, obviously at low densities, because you don't want too many or you'll be overgrazing the area, but just enough to have that kind of battle with vegetation succession. So you want that continuous sort of fight between the vegetation coming up and the browsers kind of disturbing that vegetation. And that's what gives you the messy margins, the kind of complexity, the sort of dynamism that is really rocket fuel for wildlife. But I think slowly, you know, that the pace of change begins to slow once you've got your scrub coming back, once you've got your habitat, things begin to slow a little. And then you've got this rebounding wildlife. So suddenly you have headline species here like turtle doves, which are about to go extinct, according to the RSPB in the UK, perhaps in the next 10 to 15 years. We've got all 5 UK species of owl. We've got 13 out of the 18 species of bat in the UK. And suddenly we've got all these wonderful, creatures, these species to sing about, including the nightingale.
It's amazing just how much stuff we uncovered, and it's so hard to shoehorn it all into an hour documentary without it chopping and changing too much. But we also wanted to do it in different styles, so we wanted the kind of documentary style interviews and stuff, natural history of the nightingale and the other birds and animals that we wanted to cover. But we wanted to tell certain stories that would have been impossible to film. So that's where our animator, Will Rose, came in. And for us, it was quite tricky because, like I said, we'd never made a documentary start to finish before. And we wanted to work out how we could mix animation with footage in an organic and natural way that didn't seem too bizarre. And luckily, Will, who is a fantastic animator, you will have seen his work on stuff like Hey Dougie and Peppa Pig in the past, but he's also really into his nature, which is fantastic. So we got him on board to narrate to animate the stories that we couldn't possibly film, the historical stories that we couldn't go back in time to cover, such as the famous story of Beatrice Harrison and her singing nightingale.
The nightingale's song is in itself art and has transcended that of other birds. It even made broadcasting history. In the spring of 1924, the first ever live-to-radio broadcast from an outdoor location was a duet between cellist Beatrice Harrison and a singing nightingale, recorded in her garden in Surrey. The broadcast was a sensation. 1 million people listened, and the programme was picked up as far afield as Italy, France, Spain and Hungary. Harrison received over 50,000 fan letters, and so the Nightingale live broadcast tradition was maintained as an annual event by the BBC. This was until May the 19th, 1942, when it was cut dramatically as it was going to air. Allied bombers were amassing overhead en route to Germany, and not wanting to warn the Germans of the impending raid, the sound engineers pulled the plug, but the recording remains to this day.
Despite now living in Spain, the documentary is quite UK-centric, but we wanted to tell stories from around Europe, which actually proved quite difficult to find those stories. But in one particular place, Germany, in Berlin, nightingales are thriving, which is fantastic. And there's an amazing musician called David Rothenberg, who is famous for playing his musical instruments with animals around the world. But one particular species he has a real affinity for is the nightingale.
Since before Beatrice Harrison and her cello, and to this day, people are still making music with nightingales. Musician and philosopher David Rothenberg has a particular affinity for the nightingales of Berlin.
There are some people who play music with nightingales, and I think they probably all do so for the same reason, this sense of wonder and puzzle at this sound. And as a musician, you think, how can I understand some alien music? I can try and join in and find out if there's a way for my human sound to mix in with that bird sound. So they have a repertoire of several hundred sounds, and when they hear something that piques their interest, either challenges them or kind of touches them some way, they're going to use one of their several hundred sounds to respond to that. I wouldn't say they're really copying what they hear, but they're kind of responding to what they hear, kind of integrating with it the way a human musician might play along with something they hear. You know, when I play with them, you know, often I'm kind of touched by the intensity of a performance that begins and then carries on so incessantly. I don't know if I'm always touching them or transforming them, but I know that sometimes I feel this unique music is made together between human and bird.
For me, it was just incredible to be able to spend time with these people. I love nature, but I love spending time with people that love nature too and have these kind of crazy relationships. And you can learn so much from them, from being in their presence and just enjoying what they've experienced from wildlife as well. And that's what we wanted to tell in the documentary. But it's not just David who is a musician who sings or plays music with nightingales. There's another guy as well, Sam Lee, who is actually a Mercury-nominated singer who has been singing with nightingales for a good few years across southern England.
Back in the UK, Mercury Prize-nominated folk singer Sam Lee hosts a unique evening in the woodlands of southern England.
Singing with nightingales is a project that's been going on with me for 4 years now. Out of the sort of, the discovery that when you make music with nightingales close by to them, unbelievably they reply back and you can enter into this exceptional musical dialogue with them. For me, it's, you know, singing with nightingales is about introducing an extraordinary bird with his incredible song. To get to the nightingale, we are going to walk through the dark without any lights, no artificial light at all, just using our own innate night vision. And we're going to do it in single file. And when we arrive in the area where the nightingales are singing, you're going to hear them. We're just going to get as close as we possibly can and just quietly gather and sit down and let the concert begin. I thought he was an angel bright, I'm tripping down so low, saying, kind sir, I'm a country boy. And modest to me he replied, and I daily labor for my bread. Down by the tan-yard side.
To film these scenes, it proved to be quite tricky at times. I shot the whole documentary on the Sony a7S II. I really wish the Sony a7S Mark III was out at that point, but unfortunately it wasn't. But as you saw there, Sam doesn't use any unnatural light when he's doing his concerts with the nightingales. So for me, I had to rely on using a camera with a high ISO and the tiny sliver of moonlight that there was available on the night. Lots of lying down to get silhouettes of people walking past and a slow shutter speed to get as much light in as possible. 1.8 and 2.8 as my aperture as well, so a really shallow depth of field, so which did prove tricky on focusing at certain times. But the nightingale is predominantly a nocturnal bird, so that's why we had to kind of basically work with what we had. As I mentioned already, the Nightingale is doing really well in Berlin. So of course that was a place we had to stop off to film with David. But there's lots of other projects going on there too. The main project being the Forschungsfall Nachtigall project, which is working with scientists and ornithologists, but also citizen scientists as well.
One place you don't have to go far to enjoy birdsong is Berlin. Home to almost 4 million people, it also boasts a myriad of wildlife. And in the spring, this bustling metropolis becomes the capital city for nightingales.
Berlin is so good for nightingales because, as the slogan already says, poor and sexy. Nightingales are attracted to areas such as parks. We have lots of parks. They are attracted to open spaces, and we got lots where no buildings. We got lots of undergrowth and understory. This is what they need to build their nest and to feed their young.
As I keep saying, it was these stories that we felt were incredibly important to tell, to get a complete mix and just show how broad the spectrum of the nightingale was, from writers and musicians and artists, ancient and recent history, to the current day science being done around its song and its distribution. It was great to basically entwine modern technology. I mean, 10 years ago, no one would have ever thought of giving the public access to an app where you could go out and find your own nightingale, record its song, so that then scientists could work out the distribution of a certain species. And those were these stories that we wanted to tell. Innovative science that attracted a large range of people.
At night, the Berlin public becomes citizen scientists and record the nightingale's songs with their smartphones using the Forschungsfall Nachtigalls Naturblick app.
I know that I'm in the top 10 of nightingale recorders within the project, and I think I recorded about 20 nightingales. The nice thing is that now I find nightingales like in my neighborhood, and I was so happy when I realized that they returned from their winter stay in Africa, because I had, okay, let's see if the nightingale comes back, and it came back, and I was so happy. So it really connects you also to your surroundings and to the city, nature in the city.
And I think that was the beautiful thing about the nightingale. It really did attract a large range of people from all different cultures. There's something about a nightingale song. You've got to be pretty stone cold hearted to not be moved by the nightingale song, to be out on a perfectly still summer night and have a nightingale singing at you from the bushes is something else. And I think lots of people feel that way. So that's why they all come together to enjoy this incredible bird. And it made the perfect main spine of our story.
Forschungsfall Nachtigall also hosts various events throughout the year to engage with people and explore the cultural influences of the nightingale.
Picnic and Poesy is a celebration about the nightingale. We've got so many of them in Berlin, around 3,000 singing in and around the city. We've actually got 11 in this park here this evening singing. So it's a real celebration of nature. We're out here, we're sharing food and drinks and stories. Of course, the nightingale was a very important bird in ancient Persia, so we got a lot of Persian musicians and poets here this evening. come to recite their stories. And we've also got a fast break for Ramadan. So we were allowed to start eating at, I think it was 10 to 9. So that's also lovely. So we're sharing cultures, we're sharing stories, we're sharing poetries, we're sharing a real love and a real sense of hope for this lovely bird that is so abundant in Berlin.
And without knowing much about the nightingale, you might just think it's a small brown bird, which it is, but in their own right they are quite pretty, but it is their song that they're famous for. But lots of people are passionate about them, and those were the characters that we really wanted to track down, and Mike Drew was one of them. He works for Anglian Water, and his wife calls herself a nightingale widow once the nightingales return to the UK, because he spends almost every waking hour out and about trying to track down nightingales, listen to their song, but also catch them and tag them. Because of the decline of nightingales in the UK, it's really important to know where they're going, and that's part of the story to find out why they're declining.
Mike Drew works for Anglian Water as their Biodiversity Action Plan scientist. He has a particular passion for nightingales.
I've been a part of this project, the Nightingale project, with the BTO and the Wildlife Trust here at Grafton Water since 2012. So I've been catching birds, or been catching nightingales, should I say, really, since 2012. And I feel quite honoured, really, that such a special bird like this, and something that's tragically in decline, that we're trying to find so much out about it and why it's declining. And the numbers here have been slowly declining, but the habitat seems perfect for them, and we're managing right for them and things like that. So everything seems right, but what we still don't know is why they're declining in the country. From about April to May, I'm usually here at Grafton Water, probably from about 4 o'clock in the morning. And my wife refers to herself as the nightingale widow.
Mike uses mist nets to capture the nightingales. He entices them in by playing nightingale song. As long as this is carried out by trained individuals, it's a completely safe way to capture the birds. The bird is then checked for a ring. Each ring has a unique sequence of numbers used to identify the individual. Ringing generates information on the survival, productivity, and movements of birds, helping us to understand why populations are changing.
Right, let's process you. What you can see, just on the tips, it's all bleached where it's been in the sunshine.
Mike checks the weight, age, and measurements of the bird. This is especially important with birds that have been caught on previous occasions, to see what changes, if any, have taken place. Notes are made so that they can be cross-referenced with previous years.
25th of April last year. 25th of April. As a 5, so you're a juvenile last year. Excellent. Let's go and get you back. Right, off you go. See you next year.
And as I said, nightingales are a migratory bird. So that means that they're coming from Africa to the UK and the rest of kind of Germany, France, Spain. Twice a year they come up in kind of April, May time, and then they head all the way back down in August, September to spend the winter in West Africa. So, of course, for a migratory bird, I had to migrate as well and visit West Africa because we wanted to tell that whole story of where the nightingales were going and how the people there perceive them.
Africa. At the Kartong Bird Observatory in the Gambia, they have been bird ringing since 1996. Dembo Jatta has been working with the KBO for 8 years.
I serve as an assistant field researcher. So what I do basically is to go out in the field and monitor. We go around and do a nightingale transit to find out the areas where we have these nightingales in here. The biggest threat to most of the migrant birds is simply the loss of habitat and due to human encroachment. There is no simple solution for problems like this. We have seen lots of degradation in many places has been mined, and during this process many trees have been cut down, and as well people will cut firewood for wood at home to use for cooking. This has been happening for a long time, though at first it was, at a small range, at a small scale, which is kind of sustainable. But as the population in the village increase, many people see this as a lucrative business. Most of the birds that are in Europe, that breed in Europe, winter in here and in other parts of Africa as well. So if all is done in Europe and we know nothing or less about them in here, all the efforts will be less effective. Having KBO established here, I think it will have a very good impact on the bird lives, and as well, this might also encourage, through the data that we provide here, the biological data we provide here, might encourage the government to place sound conservation policies in order to protect our environment.
The KBO also work with the British Trust for Ornithology in the hope that they can broaden and share their knowledge across the migration flyways.
This is a very good start to the morning. Some nightingale withering on from previous years, so it's exactly what we're here for.
Back in the UK, I work for the BTO, and there's been an ongoing study of nightingales breeding in the UK. And I joined that study in 2014 in East Anglia, and we were using the same methods we're now using out in West Africa. So we've been looking at trying to identify what linkages there may or may not be between those birds breeding back home in the UK and in their wintering grounds here in West Africa. So we've been deploying tags in the UK and with the aim of retrieving them the following year back on their breeding grounds. What we're using for these individuals is what we call geolocator, and it's essentially just a miniaturized clock, light sensor and a tiny battery. And the weight is well under a gram, so these are about 0.7 grams or slightly less for some of them. And the way we fit them on the bird is essentially like a small backpack, and just goes over the top of each leg, and it will sit like a backpack on the back. So it's not going to unduly affect how the birds are moving or able to forage around. Of course, these migratory species, it's not just potential for something to be changing in one location. You've got where they're breeding, where are they migrating through, and then where are they wintering. And there could be changes in any of those sort of stages. And there's been lots of work to understand how the nightingales in the UK are faring when they're breeding, and what the changes in habitat, what consequences they've had there. But there's still huge pieces of that puzzle missing about what could be happening to them on migration, and importantly, when they get to their wintering grounds. So it's just trying to build that bigger picture. And in this case, we are focused on the single species, but it feeds into the wider sort of view to try and understand just how connected, in this case, Europe and Africa are for these migratory species, and just trying to get a broad understanding across a range of species as well, so it's all relevant to other migrants.
And for me, it was these relationships that people on the ground in the Gambia, in this case, were building with this nightingale. And for someone like Mike Drew in East Anglia to be holding the same bird that then Dembo Jata would be holding in the Gambia was just a beautiful thing for me. Again, it wasn't just the kind of emotional ties that people had to this bird. They could have a physical tie as well. And as Dembo says, everyone working together, to save nature, we've got to work together. We are reliant on nature. Nature isn't reliant on us, so to speak, but we are doing a pretty good job at destroying it. And from this documentary, what we wanted to tell was the history, the good news, the bad news, the conservation message, and kind of wake people up, make people sit up and realise that something needs to be done. And that could be, you could go and train as an ornithologist, of course, but not everyone can go and do that. But you could just leave, 1 metre stretch of your garden wild, or more hopefully, and that benefits wildlife. You don't have to have a place like Knepp and completely rewild it. You can rewild your balcony. You can chuck a load of wildflower seeds on a grass verge as you drive past. You can decide not to hack back your hedgerows this year so that the birds can feed and nest in them. It's not just nightingales. The nightingale was the species that we wanted to use to tell its story, but also wake people up and show people that nature is incredible. And hopefully the last song of the nightingale did just that.
As the eminent biologist and inventor of the term biodiversity, Thomas Lovejoy, put it, if you take care of birds, you take care of most of the environmental problems in the world.
A couple of years ago, there was a State of Nature report where, for the first time, they did a kind of what they call a biodiversity intactness index, which is looking at the conservation levels, the biodiversity levels of each country. And they scrutinised 218 countries for their biodiversity. And the UK was 29th from the bottom. So we're one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world.
I think the moment we begin to realize the importance of having all the animals and plants that are in the environment, because everything is intricately connected somehow. So when they realize the whole ecosystem, the importance of having the whole ecosystem, the better we can protect the wildlife and everything within the environment.
They seem to be on their way out. Back in the 1960s, when I was born, there were about 45, 50,000 pairs. The most recent survey a few years ago showed about 5,000 pairs. So they've gone down by 90% in my lifetime. If they carry on at that rate, they will disappear during my lifetime. And I find that very, very sad. If we lost the nightingale from Britain, no matter how common it might remain in the rest of Europe, to me, that will be a real tragedy, because it's a bird that is deeply embedded in our history and in our culture.